Welcome to our online cooking class. This is my kitchen, the Thrive Nutrition and Yoga Kitchen Laboratory. So tonight we are going to make some dips and some chips. And it's interesting times trying to find some of the ingredients if we're not running to a whole bunch of different grocery stores. So I got mostly everything, had to make a couple of little substitutions. But that's part of cooking, right, is trying to figure it all out. So I thought that we would talk about dips and chips because when we entertain, it's nice to show our friends how amazing we are in the kitchen. And also, dips are really, really easy to make. And store-bought dips tend to have a lot of preservatives in them and a lot of sugar in them. So if you are conscious of sugar, then making your own, you can control everything. And also because as we are moving forward in our world, we're going to want to start seeing other people and having them around. And it's just nice to have a little skill set in your back pocket. So we will make 2 dips tonight. I sent you the notes and the recipes for the dips and the chips. So the first one we're going to make is the Cilantro Lentil Dip. And when we do sort of multi-recipe cooking, we have to think about our timing on stuff. So I'm going to actually turn my oven on right now because we're going to need it for our second recipe, and I need to have it all warmed up. So I'm going to set my oven to 415 and allow that to preheat for the garlic chili lime chips while we're working on the dip. So let's get started. So if you're following along, we'll just work our way through the recipe and talk a little bit about the nutritional value and the health components of things. And again, if you have any questions, just hop on and ask, and I will do my best to answer them. So we are going to measure out our lentils. Get my 1 cup measure here and my pot. So I couldn't find yellow lentils. Our grocery store had red lentils, which you could use instead, but we're making that pico de gallo and it's red. So I wanted to have some contrasting colors. So these are green lentils. So I am just going to give them a measure. And actually I'm going to disappear off screen for a second because we want to rinse before we use our lentils. We want to give them just a little bit of rinse to get any of the dust off of them, just to see if there's any that aren't really in good shape that we want to pick out, and just to give them a little bit of a start. So I'm going to put them into my little colander, head over to my sink, give them a rinse, and you can take a peek ahead in the recipe and see what's coming next. I'll be right back. So the lentils are all rinsed, and I can just take a little look through and just make sure that there's none that are really in bad shape, and I'm not seeing any. So I'm just going to put them right into my pot. This is the fun part about cooking in a small space, is trying to keep everything contained and put everything in the right spots. And then I'm going to add my water. So I'll take this back here. I have 3 cups of water pre-measured, so I'm just going to add my water to my pot. And then we want to bring this to a boil just to get it started, and then we'll turn it down, and it's going to need to simmer for about 20 to 24 minutes. So we'll bring that up to speed here. Some nice heat on it. Give it a stir. And let that boil away. And while we're doing that, just skipping ahead in the recipe a little bit, it calls for ½ teaspoon of cumin. So I have fresh cumin. I like to use fresh ingredients as much as possible, like whole herbs. So these are a little dried seed. And I like to grind them up myself if I can. You don't have to. You can buy it pre-ground. But I just like the smell of everything when I'm cooking. So I'm going to measure out my ½ teaspoon of my cumin and give that a grind. So it really actually doesn't take that much when you're grinding. It goes pretty quickly. We tend to cook a lot of curries at our house. We really like curry. So when we use the nice fresh herbs and spices, it just gives it that, that nice, beautiful smell in the kitchen. So this is almost completely ground.
Catherine?
Yeah.
Would it be the same amount of fresh to actual, like, the spice that you have in your pantry?
That's a great question. So I have it ground up, if you could see it in there. So when I go back in with my spoon, it's a tiny little bit more. So there's a little bit left over. So I'm going to go with the ½ teaspoon. And if you like it a little bit spicier, a little more flavorful, you could add the rest, but there's hardly any left over. In fact, you know what? There's not really any left over once I start leveling it out. And I dumped it. So I don't know if you can see that. That is ½ teaspoon. So that'll be up the same in a pre-ground one. So now I'm going to have to pick that up because that's
okay.
Over.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question because fresh and dry can be two very different things, right? And we want to make sure that we're using the right things. So just on a side note, if you're using sugar in a recipe and you want to substitute a dry sugar for a wet sugar, like let's say a cane sugar for a honey or maple syrup, you need to do a conversion. You need to Google that and do the conversion on it because they're not the same, dry to liquid. So we'll just set that aside. And I already pre-chopped things just so that it would be more, so the class would flow. I just wanted it to flow and not have to worry about chopping too much. We've got some tomatoes we'll chop up later. So my onions are just in small pieces here, if you can see that. And I'm going to be adding them into the lentils. So they're still coming up to boil here. And I'm going to add the onions that are all pre-chopped. And this is perfect. This is great for meal prepping. So if you live in a busy house or if you work full time and coming home at night, dinner's kind of like, I don't know, what do I want to make? If you think ahead with your recipes, you can do things like this. Pre-chop your onions, pre-chop your garlic, store them in sealed containers in the fridge, and then you don't have to spend that extra 20 minutes or so on getting all of the ingredients organized. It's kind of all done for you. So the onions are pre-chopped, the garlic is pre-chopped, I've done the cumin, and we have the salt. So this is the seed. Sorry.
It's Denise. Can I ask a question? You said that you chop the onions and put them in the fridge. How long can they stay in the fridge?
I would say a couple of days. I wouldn't leave them more than 3 days, and then you kind of need to take a peek at them, right? So what I have found is that even with the cover on them, with the lid on them, the fridge will still start to smell like onions if you leave them for too long. So we have a fridge in our garage that I'll put the onions and garlic in if I've pre-chopped them. So make sure that it's a really good seal on it. Okay. And then I would use it within a couple of days. Okay. So if you're meal prepping for a whole week, you might want to meal prep like for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Wednesday night, if you're able to, prep for the second half of the week, just so that things are fresh. And if you're using any meat that needs to come out of the freezer, you would take it out kind of at the midway of the week or the night before so that you don't have things sitting in the fridge for too long.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so I'm going to pre-measure the salt also because it is going in at the same time as the onion, garlic, and the cumin. So the salt is a ½ teaspoon. Oh, I was saying this is sea salt. So this is a fine grind sea salt. We also have them in, I use a Himalayan pink salt. in other, when I'm grinding on top of a recipe or on top of a salad or something. But in cooking, you can use the finer grind of sea salt, and we prefer sea salt to iodized salt, like table salt, because when salt is iodized, it's the good minerals in it are depleted because basically they're processing it. And so sea salt has its natural components left in it, the natural minerals that we need in our bodies. So that's almost boiled. Give that a stir. And I'm going to measure out my ½ teaspoon of sea salt and just put it in with my cumin because it's all going in at the same time into the same place. Put that aside. And then we're going to be adding some lime juice. So that's coming to a boil. I'm going to add these ingredients to it, and then I'll show you my little lime juicer. We'll juice a lime together and some tricks for getting maximum amount of juice out of that. So we'll send that down to simmer, and we'll put the onions in. And I like to use glass containers as much as possible, just for to prevent any plastics, if there's any plastics left out there with BPAs or whatever leaking into. Sometimes you can't, that's just the way it is, but if you can, using glass. My chopped garlic, put that in, give that a little stir. So that's going to allow the onions and the garlic to soften without having sauteed them. So we're not using any oils in this or any butter to soften them. They're going to just boil down with the lentils, and then we'll add the salt and the cumin. And that'll be nice because the everything will get infused with that cumin from it sitting and simmering together. So give that a stir. Smells delicious. And the nice thing is that we're going to put all of this into the food processor. So if your onion chunks are a little bit bigger, your garlic's a little bit bigger, or if it doesn't look all nice and linear and the same, it doesn't matter because it's all going to get blended up anyway. So we were talking about our lime, and so get a few things out of the way here. So a nice way, if you aren't familiar with, to get a little bit more juice out of your citrus fruit, your lemons or your limes, is to just give them a little roll, and that kind of starts to soften up the inside a little bit. I have a little juicing container that I use, and it's actually quite perfect. And it has a lid that goes on it. So if I were to juice the whole lime and not use it all, I could cover it and put it in the fridge and then use that to add to salad dressings later on. Because we only actually need a tablespoon of lime juice out of this, but we'll juice the whole lime. Clean that off of here. And we'll give this a slice. I pre-washed everything, by the way. It's a very good idea to make sure that you wash before you cook with them, just to get any grocery store leftovers, anybody that's been touching them, you can give them a little rinse. Some people like to use a vegetable or a fruit wash. Some people like to use a little mild soap. I just use water. I just give them, and I use Enyo products, so I have an Enyo vegetable scrub that you can run over it, maybe not your tomatoes, but the things that have a harder rind on them, just to get any residual stuff out of all the little pits and dips. So we just put the lime on here, press it down, give it a squeeze and a twist, and actually getting quite a bit of juice out of it. If you didn't have a juicer, you can still juice your citrus by running it through your hand. So the reason we would use our hand is if there's any seeds, we'd catch the seeds and they wouldn't go right into it, because some people just will use like a lemon right on top of a salad or something, so they want to make sure the seeds don't go in it. So you could just squeeze and let the juice run through your fingers and catch all of the seeds. But we're fortunate enough tonight to have a juicer. And we actually need limes in all of our recipes tonight, I think. So limes are really, really good for you. Super high in vitamin C. There's some studies that say that limes are actually better for you than lemons in terms of their antioxidants and their vitamin C components. So you can use limes in salad dressing. You could use limes in, you can add them at the last minute to like a soup or a stew, and it just kind of brings a little bit of a shine to the finished product if you're about presentation. Like I said, salad dressings, in dips, and of course anything that is sort of Mexican flavored has some lime and cilantro in it. So we are going to put that aside, and we're going to let the lentils simmer for about another 20 minutes or so. Just working away over here. And we'll have to do a little test every once in a while just to check on the softness of the lentils. So after 20 minutes, they may or may not be softened. Something that you could do, just a little trick if you want to do it ahead of time, is soak your lentils before you even make the recipe. When you soak them, they just kind of absorb the water a little bit. It pre-activates them. It's like sprouting almost, and then that way they cook a little bit faster. So nutritional components, we'll go through that before we switch to the next recipe. So lentils are really good for iron, and we need iron for energy. We need iron in our blood. You may have heard of people who are anemic, and when you're anemic, you have low blood levels or low iron levels in your blood. And oftentimes people don't know they're anemic until they're anemic, and then they're like, why am I so tired all of the time? And it turns out that they are missing that iron component. So lentils are good for bringing a little bit of iron into your diet in a different way, rather than a supplement. And supplements are always something, if you're going to use those, that you should make sure that you're talking to a health professional to make sure you get the right kind. Lentils are also full of fiber. So they're really good for our gastrointestinal process. They really make sure that things are digesting and moving along, which is really important. They also have folate in them, and folate is a B vitamin. So we've heard of folic acid, and that's something that doctors recommend that pregnant women take. And it's also good for any growth period, really. So pregnancy, infancy, and adolescence, it's important to have folate in the diet because it helps with the making of red and white blood cells in the bone marrow, and it takes our carbohydrates and turns them into energy. And of course, our bodies are expending a lot of energy as we're nurturing a baby, or a baby's growing, or a teenager is growing. So lentils are good for that. And other ways you could use them, pre-cook them and throw them in a salad. You could use them in soups or in stews. So if you don't want to eat meat, so iron, you can get iron from meat also, right? It's heme iron, which is a different iron that you get from plants. But this is a nice way to not have red meat in your diet a lot. You can substitute lentils in instead. And what else? They're good for our DNA. They help with cellular growth and reproduction, so that's important. And hence the whole needing to have them during pregnancy, infancy, and adolescence when things are turning over and really growing. They have potassium in them, which is good for lowering blood pressure, and it helps to protect loss of muscle mass, actually, and preserves bone mineral density. And so we need to, as we are moving through our life, be aware of our bone density, which is why exercise is good for us also, because when our muscles are active, it keeps our bones strong and it helps with bone density. But potassium is really good for that also. You may have heard of people taking bananas at the end of, if they're at the end of a race or something, just because so much is expended. It's one of those things that you need to replace. It doesn't just replace itself. And lentils also have protein in them. So everyone always asks the question, well, if you're a vegetarian or you're vegan, where do you get your protein from? And there's actually quite a bit of protein in vegetables. It's just not as dense, not as much as in an animal product. So you can still get protein in different ways. You just need to be mindful of how much you're getting. And we need that protein in our diet to build and repair muscles, because we're active and things, you know, get worn down or torn if we're exercising, and not in a bad way necessarily, but just anytime we exercise and stretch our muscles, it creates little micro tears, and that protein helps to rebuild them. So that's really important. And it also helps with our cartilage and our skin and our blood. So protein is really important. So if you make the decision to not eat meat, then you need to be very mindful of where your protein is coming from. Onions are really good for us because they are a prebiotic. So you may have heard of probiotics. Sometimes people take probiotic supplements, but really big in the health and wellness discussions these days is about our gut microbiome and how our gut is actually our second brain. And a lot of things happen here. And so when we are eating what we call the standard North American diet, which consists of a lot of fats and a lot of trans fats and a lot of processed foods, as well as when we take antibiotics, and there's absolutely a time and a place for antibiotics. We have to sometimes, but those things kind of break down these trillions of really good gut receptors that we have, and so we need foods to help rebuild them. And onions and garlic are alliums, and they are part of that. So they actually help to reintroduce and increase probiotics in our system, like lactobacillus. You might have heard of that in yogurt, and bifidobacteria, and they help with our digestion. I could talk for hours about good gut health because I find it very fascinating, and it really is the base of our health. What else have we got? Garlic has vitamin B6 in it, which has melatonin, so it's actually good for helping us sleep. And manganese, which is good for blood sugar regulation. And our blood sugar is kind of really out of whack in North America also because of the amount of processed foods that we eat and the amount of omega-6 fatty acids. So having foods that help to regulate that insulin that is produced when we eat is really good for our body, for our overall health. And interesting, garlic also has copper in it. So our bodies are kind of like periodic tables, if you think back to science of that big periodic table. And we do have minerals that we have in our bodies and that we need to replace. And copper is one of them, and it has a lot to do with our red blood cells. So, and our red blood cells carry oxygen and through our blood into our body. So it is really, really important. And what else? So many good things. Oh, and copper can help prevent cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis. So it's good to have garlic. It's really good for you. It's an anti-inflammatory and antibacterial. It does lots and lots of good things. If you don't like garlic, I don't have a solution for you. And I had a lady who came to a workshop who her husband was actually allergic to garlic, and I was like, I don't have a solution because garlic is kind of its own thing. So, all right. Any questions about the components? Oh, I didn't talk about the cumin. And it actually has all of the same things as in the garlic and the lentils and the onions. So we can move on to our chips. So it was interesting today, because we're going to come back to the dip. It was interesting today when I did some shopping, trying to find brown rice wraps. I was mentioning to you that, you know, in these times where we have limited access to things, because we're trying to maybe only go to one grocery store instead of a bunch of grocery stores, it can be challenging to find stuff, and things like brown rice wraps might only be available at a health food store, of which there are none that carry foods like that here where I live. So I did manage to find these really cool, they're not gluten-free, unfortunately, but they are protein flat wraps. So we're gonna give those a try and see how that goes. Normally, I would try to have something gluten-free just because that's, excuse me, part of my eating protocol, but not everybody eats gluten-free. So you can use regular wraps if you wanted to. And this wants to open, there we go. So they have the same texture, they're oblong, so that will be interesting. Get rid of this. I need like a garbage can right here. I'll have to think about that. Remember that for the next time. So for our wraps, basically, we're just going to take all of the ingredients and mix them into a bowl, cut them up, and put them on our cookie sheet with parchment paper. A little noise here. I like to use brown parchment paper because it's not bleached. It's natural. And you just need to be mindful, if you've never cooked with parchment paper before, that if you have floppy edges like this, they will burn in the oven. So you want to make sure that you have them, the parchment paper, as close to the size of the tray as possible. So we are going to combine our olive oil. And ideally with olive oil, you want to buy it in glass and in dark glass so that the light doesn't get to it, because when light gets to olive oil, it actually breaks down the healthy components of it. And in plastic, the plastic would absorb into the oil. So we just need to be mindful of that. So I'm going to measure out my tablespoon of olive oil. And this is extra virgin olive oil. Cold pressed is really good also, because then it hasn't gone through any of the heat processing. And that means that it's the integrity of it is intact. And then we are going to use a lime, juiced. So we're going to steal the lime from our other recipe. So we want to add the olive oil, 1 whole lime. So that lime ended up being like 1/4 cup. So we'll put that in there, and then we'll rejuice a lime for our other one. And we need 1.5 teaspoons of chili powder. So there's half, and 1.5. That aside. And some garlic powder. So 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. We very, very rarely use garlic powder at our house because we like to cook with fresh, but it's one of those things that sometimes the recipe just has to have the garlic powder in it. Get out a little whisk. Whisk all of these together. We need to add the salt still. Blend it all up. Smells good. Smells limey. They weren't kidding when they said garlic chili lime chips. And then we'll add our salt. So just 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I find salt is a flavor enhancer. In baking, you need to be a little bit more careful with salt because it really is chemistry and it's kind of an exact thing. But with cooking like this, if you wanted to leave salt out of things and then add it later, there's nothing wrong with that. Salt's something to be mindful if you have blood pressure issues or water retention issues, because it definitely contributes to holding back water. So got all of that in there, and then we need to paint these. So I have my brush. It's a very watery mixture, so I'm just going to paint that on. And I think I'll just put it on the one side. So we're making our own nacho chips, basically. And cut that up into some pieces. And I'm going to do myself a favor and stack them on top of each other just for ease. And cut them into what kind of looks like pie shapes. It's not exactly a round wrap. And then we'll put those on the baking sheet. So I'm just leaving like 1/4 of an inch in between them. Just a little bit of space, just enough air, room for air to circulate a little bit. And we'll do another one. So the nice thing about having your own chips also is, again, you can take a look at what the ingredients are. If you're mindful of preservatives, if you have people with allergies, you can be selective and know that you're in control a little bit of what's going into your body. Sometimes we just have to buy store-bought ones because that's easier, but really this is pretty quick, actually. And the baking process itself is only 6 minutes or so. So if you have little people, this might be a fun activity just to mix everything up and let them paint the wraps and then put them into the oven and they can watch them bake. They can feel like they made their own fancy chips. Those. Try these ones a little bit smaller. I feel like those first guys didn't quite get enough paint on them. Let me give them another brush over. I'm just going to use the 2 wraps because they're quite big. Nice space. It's like being like in grade 3 math again, where you have to put all the pieces together and try to figure out how all of the different shapes fit. And I'm going to give those other ones just a little bit more. I just think that they need a little bit. So I don't know if you eat gluten-free or not, but if that's something that you are looking at doing or something that you're interested in, there are options. Brown rice in terms of chips is a good option. Be mindful of corn, just because corn is one of the most highly sprayed crops, unfortunately, and yet it's so yummy. We love corn. So we just need to be mindful of that, and you can find organic corn products, and that way you're not having gluten in your diet, because gluten does cause inflammation in our bodies and in our guts, in our brains, and can really be at the root of some people's problems and they don't even know it. All right, I'm going to give these a little bit of a sprinkle. Himalayan salt, a little extra bonus. Put them into the oven and put them in for 6 minutes. And our lentils should almost be done. It smells very oniony back here. So I'm going to give those a try. I want to make sure that they are cooked enough because we are going to put them through the food processor. Yeah, I think they're good actually. That's perfect. There we go. So I'm going to turn that off and do some draining here. It's a bigger colander. So we want to get them out of the liquid, and we're going to let them cool down. So just really careful here. Normally I do this over a sink, but I'm easy to be able to see what's going on. Bring that out. And I'm just going to put that aside and let them cool down. So if you are making this, we want to cool the lentils before we put them into, particularly into a blender, unless you have a Vitamix. I know a Vitamix can handle heat, but if you put some hot product, like these lentils and onions, into a regular blender, it has a tendency to explode and the lid come off, and we wouldn't want you to get hurt or burned. So just be mindful of that if you are using something other than a Vitamix. I'm going to use my food processor today just to try it in there. But I do have a Vitamix and I love it because you really can transfer hot soups right off the stove and into the Vitamix and whiz it up, and it's like magic. You end up with soup. If you don't have a blender or a Vitamix, no, you can use a hand immersion blender. So a hand immersion blender would work also. Just being mindful that you need to have all of it under the surface of the product, otherwise it will splatter everywhere. So you can keep that in mind. It works better with soups. I'm not sure how the lentils would do because they need to get a little bit mushier. So probably your food processor or your blender would be better for that. All right, so for our chips, anything that is a wheat-based or a grain-based is going to have fiber in it. So there's two different types of fiber. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber. And soluble fiber can help to reduce your appetite and lower your cholesterol levels and help with your blood sugar regulation. And fiber helps to feed your gut, which is really, really important because our guts, as I mentioned, take a bit of a kicking sometimes. We're a little bit hard on them. So soluble fiber dissolves in water, and basically it turns into like a goo. And that's what helps things to move along and to, like I said, lower blood cholesterol, glucose levels. Insoluble fiber attracts water to it. And it wouldn't be a workshop if we didn't talk about poop, but basically it's what helps to form your stool. So we need insoluble fiber in our diet so that we can bind everything together, and then the soluble fiber helps to move it along, and we have regular bowel movements because that is extremely, extremely important to be going to the bathroom regularly. Yeah, we're doing really well for time here. That's fantastic. So our cayenne pepper that we put into, our chili pepper that we put into our chips is, it has phosphorus in it. So coming back to that periodic table, and that is good for our bones and our teeth. So those dense mineral parts of our body, and the use of carbohydrates and fats. And we need phosphorus in our body to help with the making of protein for growth and maintenance in the body. So you can get all of that out of a little cayenne pepper. And
her countertops are white. Like even the fridge looks like our fridge. Yeah, it's fine.
There's lots of vitamin C and E and K, lots of vitamins in chili powders and cayenne peppers. So try not to shy away from the spicy stuff. It actually has a lot of really good components in it. Just
Covers
the nice thing when you're making your own is that you can control how much of it you're actually putting into your diet. So vitamin C is necessary. We have to have it. It's water soluble. So when you eat foods or you take a vitamin C supplement, it actually, your body will use what it needs, and then you'll just pee out what you don't need. You pass the rest of it. So we need it, vitamin C, for repairing of tissues, but it's really, really important to have it for our immune systems. It is an antioxidant. So antioxidants are basically a component in our body that, antioxidants are a component in food that we can bring into our body through dark berries and leafy greens and all of the really healthy eat the rainbow type foods. And what antioxidants do is they look for free radicals in our body. And free radicals, just a second, I'll get back to that. My oven here. Take these chips out. Look at that. Done. Nice and crispy and hot. And they smell amazing. So we'll let those cool. So free radicals are unpaired atoms in our body that they come into our body through alcohol, through off-gassing of furniture, clothes, carpets, through chemicals. We can't help it. Unless we lived in a bubble, we really can't control all of the exposure to free radicals. So that's why it's really important that we eat foods that have antioxidants in them, and vitamin C is an antioxidant, because what they do is basically they find these free radicals in the body and they grab them and they help to take them out, so that we're keeping our body healthy and getting rid of these sort of little invaders that we don't want to have in our system. Vitamin E is also a powerful antioxidant. Vitamin K is important for our bone health and when we cut ourselves, for wound healing. So all of these things, these vitamins, are in the chili powder and in the cayenne powder, and they're in lots of other things, so many of our foods, the cilantro that we're about to use. So I think a lot of times we don't realize all of the health building components that are in food, and we just sort of go to the grocery store, pick our stuff up, make a recipe and eat it, and don't realize the role that it actually plays in our body. And so when we do things like this, we can talk about why it's important and the roles that these different pieces play in our health. So we are going to move on to the pico de gallo, and I left a tomato just to do a little chopping demo, and get these guys out of the way. And already we have our chips done, and just in a matter of minutes we're going to have one of our first dips done, and we're halfway done our lentils. So I do have some tomatoes pre-chopped here, and it's nice to have them pre-chopped because it allowed some of the liquid to come out of them. And again, the tomatoes, I've already washed them. So I'm going to just chop in half, take out that core. These are hothouse tomatoes because we're not quite into tomato season yet, but once it comes, there's always lots of tomatoes, a flurry of tomatoes. So I'm going to put them sort of on the flat end as much as possible, and then just cut them in half again. And then we always want to try to have the flat end on our cutting board so that our food isn't sliding out from underneath us as we're chopping. Finger safety is very important. Add these. Tomatoes contain lycopene. And lycopene is an antioxidant, also a very powerful antioxidant. Some people can't handle lycopene, but it's not entirely common. But lycopene does have properties that are related to, and research that's been done on it related to cancer. and trying to heal when people, or prevent when people have cancer. And they are full of vitamin C, as we mentioned, and vitamin K. So that's our taking care of our blood, our bone metabolism, our blood calcium levels, and clotting, which is really important because when we cut ourselves, we need to clot so that we can heal. Which leads to kind of a conversation about inflammation. So inflammation is really important to the body when it's good inflammation. And good inflammation comes from when we cut ourselves, we have a response that the wound becomes protected by this inflammation so that it can heal. But again, because of the standard North American diet, we tend to have a lot of inflammation in our body, and we're not aware of it. It's kind of hiding in our cells and in our organs, and we don't tend to know about it until we start to experience joint pain, like arthritic type pain, autoimmune type diseases, cancers, heart conditions. So when we think about healing the body, one of the first things we can think about is the gut, getting the gut in order, making sure we have healthy bacteria, because that healthy bacteria helps to keep the inflammation down, the bad inflammation, and allows our bodies to be strong and healthy, and prevents I call it dis-ease in our body, in a state of unease, right, when things are starting to go badly. So that's 5 tomatoes, just chopped into nice little squares. And I've left the seeds in it, again, because it brings that little watery component to it, so it just gives it where some of the flavor is, and then it will allow it to be more of like a dip texture, not completely dry. Again, cilantro is washed already, pre-washed. So I'm just going to, not everybody likes cilantro. Some people say there's like a genetic thing where some people can't handle cilantro and it tastes like soap to them. So we have one of those people in our house. But the rest of us really, really love cilantro, the smell of it and the taste of it. And it's really common in Mexican type cooking and in Indian type cooking. So I'm just going to roll it kind of all up into a little line here and just give it a chop. Stems, there's a little bit of stems in there. We tend to throw out the stems, but that's actually where a lot of the flavor comes from. And we have to remember that we want all of the nutrients, and if we're throwing out the stems, unless they're really, really woody stems, we don't want those. But if we're throwing out the stems, then we're also throwing out those good, healthy components. So this calls for a 1/4 cup. I'm going to eyeball it and say that that's about a 1/4 cup, and just mix that in. I like to just eyeball things sometimes. The more that I cook, the more I'm learning what those quantities look like. And my red onion is in my fridge. So I talked about covering up our onions when we put them in the fridge. So this one I've actually covered with a wrap. It's a beeswax wrap instead of using saran wrap. And I love this one. This product is called Abigo, but there's other different ones out there. So they're just like a cotton soaked in beeswax, and you can crumple them all up and then unfold them and bring them back and reuse them. Just wash them in cool water, and they're like the perfect substitute for a plastic wrap. So I can bring that back up and use it again and again. I love mine. I have a bunch of them, and I have some bags too. Red onion, mix that in there. And then we need our lime. So we need another lime. Give them a roll. This one is such a nice, simple recipe that you could, if you had people coming over, you could just throw it together. And you could add other things if you wanted to. I think this is a kind of a traditional, but if you wanted to throw lentils in there, you could. Some lentils to get some protein in it. You could throw some chickpeas in there. Chickpeas are really, really good for fiber and blood sugar control. You could throw black beans in there if you wanted to, also really good for fiber. squeeze another lime here. Honestly, I don't know what I would do without my lime and lemon juicer. It's perfect. Other half. So really, the dressing on this is literally just lime juice and some sea salt and pepper. And so kind of leads nicely into a conversation about salad dressings and how you don't have to buy salad dressings. All you need is an oil, an acid, a little bit of salt, and maybe some flavoring. So you could use olive oil, some Dijon mustard, a little bit of lemon juice, or cider vinegar, or balsamic vinegar. You might want to put a little sweetener in there, maybe a little bit of honey or maple syrup, some salt and pepper, and just play around with it and never have to buy store-bought dressings again. And you can make them at the beginning of the week and keep them in your fridge and just keep pulling them out as you need to. So there's our lime. Throw that in there and give it a crack of salt. And some pepper. My people at my house like spicy food. I'm not a really big fan of spice. I'm more about flavor. I like to have flavor. And just mix that all in there. Lots of liquid in the bottom. And there you have it. A very simple dip. So you could refrigerate this for up to 5 days, and you can serve it with tortilla chips or with tacos, or you could put it on nachos if you're making them. You could put this on top of a salad if you wanted to, and or just enjoy it as a salad the way that it is. So there you go, a little pico de gallo. Put that, running out of room, eh? Put that over there. And if you do like a little bit of spice, then you could add some jalapeno to it. And again, get those nice healing properties of peppers. Any questions? I feel like I'm talking so fast.
I was just about to ask, where did the jalapenos go? Because I always make mine with jalapenos as well.
Right, yeah, I'm not making them with jalapenos, but yeah, my husband, I think, would be happy if I threw a jalapeno in there. He's all about the spice. So just, do you use the seeds when you use your jalapenos?
We usually do, but my husband he grew up with Mexican food, so I've learned to enjoy Mexican foods and the spices, but my kids don't really like it. But me and my husband do love it.
I think it's definitely acquired. Like you got to kind of build up to it, maybe. So yeah, good for you. I would take the seeds out and then be mindful of the kind of peppers too, right? You could probably play with the types of peppers too, but I think jalapeno would be the standard one that you would use. Okay, so we can actually make our cilantro lentil dip. So I'm going to move a few things out of the way here and bring that food processor forward. I think if this was a TV show, there would be somebody that actually did all of this for me. I wouldn't have to be moving my own stuff. Those chips actually really look amazing. So bring that forward a little bit. And like I said, I'm going to use a food processor tonight, but sometimes I just want to play with the food processor because I've done it in the Vitamix before and just see what that looks like. So we are going to add all of the drained lentils. Feels like a lot, but put that all in. A little bit of a mess. Such is the way it is, right? Wouldn't be cooking if there wasn't a little bit of a mess going on. And then we are going to add our cilantro. So we need a little bit more cilantro. So we want to have a cup of cilantro this time. And again, I'm going to keep the stems. I don't know if you know or not, basil is really good for that too. Keeping the stems on basil, that's actually where a lot of the flavor is. So if you're making a nice pasta or a pesto or something, don't be in a hurry to pick the leaves off of the stems. That's a Jamie Oliver thing. That's his recommendation. So throw the cilantro in here. Scoop some of that in. Over there. And more lime juice. We need a tablespoon of lime juice. So I need this back. One more lime. Interesting, we're not having any avocados tonight, though. We tend to have avocados with our Mexican food, too. I just read a thing the other day that said, if you freeze your avocados, skin in, when you pull them out, they will be exactly in the place where they were before you put them in the freezer. And they won't have turned brown, unless they were brown when you put them in the freezer. And I didn't know that. I thought that was very interesting. Because we often don't use all of our avocado, right? So a tablespoon of lime juice. Just a tiny little bit left over. If you like it limier, you could add the rest of it. And oh, I need more cumin. I've moved things around. So what you could do if you're planning on recipes is you can pre-measure everything. You can pre-grind or pre-measure everything and then just take them out. I wanted to do the limes separately because of the size of that. And I wanted to just kind of show you the idea of being able to use your hand. Pestle. There it is, right in front of me. Give those a grind. Cumin's really nice when you saute it too, because you want to, if you're making like a curry or something, if you saute it, you'll see them kind of start to jump, and that's when you want to make sure that you turn your heat down, because they will burn on you very quickly. So put my cumin in there, nice fresh ground, and our sea salt. Half a teaspoon of sea salt. We've got the lime juice. So we need the olive oil. So a 1/4 cup of olive oil. So when we go to blend this, first of all, it's going to make a little bit of noise. So we'll just work through that. But if it doesn't get creamier, then you can start adding a little bit of water to it to bring out a little bit more of the creaminess, and just gauge that by your eye. This is the part of a workshop where I'm always really afraid that it's going to explode and blow up all over the place. So keep your fingers crossed for me that things go well. We'll start with pulsing. That's perfect. And it'll give that a little bit of a stir down there, so I can see the texture in it. So it's not quite ready. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's still got some lumps in it. So we're just going to try to get it a little bit creamier. Put it on high. I don't know if you saw or not, I just lifted that up a little bit just because it is still warm, so I just want to let a little bit of air in there. Yeah, just give that a push down. So in a food processor, in a Vitamix, you might have the option of having even higher speeds. It might get it a little bit creamier. I don't mind a little bit of texture in my dips, so I'm going to leave that as it is, and we'll transfer some into a bowl. Makes quite a bit, actually. So you can see the cilantro. So if you're trying to hide cilantro from people, this is not going to work. You might need to use a Vitamix or a heavy-duty blender. But it still has some texture to it. It has a nice consistency. So I think that it would actually pick up quite nicely on a chip. So these, I'll show you, these are really nice and crispy. They have a nice crack to them. So if I'm going into my dip, it actually holds it really well. And I'm going to give you a try and see. I'll tell you how it is. Good. Okay, those chips are amazing. They're really, really delicious. I quite like that. And the dip actually has a nice consistency to it. And then the pico, because these chips are so nice and solid, they do a nice little job of being a spoon too. The lime and the cilantro is amazing. So, coming back to sort of the health benefits of everything, there are a lot of healing properties and health properties in our foods. Cilantro is also an antioxidant. And again, we talked about how we have those free radicals and we want to get them out of our body. So cilantro is really good for grabbing onto those and getting them out. It has vitamin A in it, which is really good for our vision, our immune system, and our reproductive systems. Calcium for building strong bones. So calcium and magnesium should go together. And if you're taking a supplement of that, I always recommend that you go to a health food store that you trust the people that work there to know what the best products are, because sometimes supplements are made with lesser quality ingredients than you might find in a health food store product. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you can find supplements that have non-animal products in them, in the gel tabs or in the coatings on them. So that's just something to be mindful of also. And there is magnesium in the cilantro, and magnesium is actually a relaxant in our body. And it's good for our heart muscles. It's good for helping us to sleep, and for our blood vessels, because it just kind of goes after the smooth muscles in our body and allows them to soften a little bit. Good for digestion, and is really good paired with calcium. And then we had the red onion, which is full of fiber and folic acid. So we talked about folate and folic acid being good for pregnancy, infancy, and adolescence. And red onion, like the yellow onion and the garlic, is also a prebiotic to help reset that gut bacteria. And the limes, we talked about having lots of vitamin C in them and how they are good for our immune system. And jalapenos we mentioned the capsaicin in them, that is good for increasing our metabolism and helping us to burn fats in our bodies. And they are also good for relieving topical pain and for helping with insulin spikes and diabetes. So ironically, as when we eat hot, spicy foods, it actually creates a cooling in our body. So in Ayurvedic medicine, they recommend eating cooling foods as the weather gets hot, but those cooling foods can be spicy foods. So that's just an interesting, fun little tidbit about jalapenos. And they're just really spicy, and some people like that. So that's awesome. It is 7:15, and magically, we have all of the recipes made and a bit of a kitchen mess, but it wouldn't be fun in the kitchen if we didn't have a little bit of a mess going on. Just before we wrap up, thank you for coming tonight and indulging me in my first online cooking class and watching me figure out how to make this work. I've enjoyed cooking here and cooking with you. Normally I would be cooking for you. If we could do this in person, you would be sitting on the other side of this island and we would do this together. But I think this is a good improvisation when we have to, because we're all just doing the best we can, right?